Hey there, what's up? My name's Noémi. Today I'm doing a video all about literature that takes place in Los Angeles, which is something that I've been interested in for so long because I feel like so many authors have attempted to write books about Los Angeles, and it's such a diverse and multifaceted city that it's just so fun to read about, in my opinion. And I'm living here, so I think I have a vested interest in it. But that's why I'm doing this, and I'm also going to be doing a part 2 because there are so many books set in LA that I absolutely am super excited to read. So comment down below if there are books that I did not mention in this one that you'd like to see in the next one, because I already have a whole list planned out. I've got Thomas Pynchon, Francesca Leah Block, and Eve Babbitt's, a bunch of different books that I have not yet read but I really want to, so those will be in my next literary LA book review list video. Yeah, so these ones are ones that I've read pretty recently in the last year and a half or so, and I've mentioned a couple of them already, but most of them will be new to you guys, so I'm super excited to be doing this. Also, you noticed I got a haircut, that's why it's really short, and I vlogged it because I actually cut my own hair because I was just feeling weird. And I decided that, not that anybody cares, this is like a tangent alert, but I've been really struggling with figuring out what I want to do with my channel because I'm super interested in books and booktube, but I also have so many ideas that don't really fit into that category. And so I think that I'm just going to start up a new channel that's more for other random sort of videos that I want to do that aren't book related, and then keep this channel specifically for books because I don't know, I just love you guys so much, the people that are here, but I have a feeling that the content that you guys want to see is pretty much strictly book related, and if I want to make other content I should just put that somewhere else. So if you have an opinion on that, let me know, but I think that's where I'm going to be putting that video. But if you are interested for some odd reason, then I'll link it. Also, exciting news, I got a new camera and I'm obsessed with it. It's the Canon M50 if you're interested in photography at all. So far I love it. I think it's really great. So yeah, I'm super excited about that. This was a really long intro. I'm gonna cut out most of it. Let's do this. Okay, so a lot of these books I don't actually have physical copies of because when I was reading them in college, I got them from the library and then I ended up returning them, or I bought them and I resold them because, what can I say, I am broke. This one I do have a copy of, and it is The Revolt of the Cockroach People by Oscar Zeta Acosta. I sort of had a mixed feeling about this book. It did grow on me, but as you'll see, the intro is by Hunter S. Thompson, who is known for his gonzo style journalism that he kind of invented. It's a style of journalism that's basically written without real claims of objectivity, and it often includes the journalist being a part of the story as a first-person narrator, which is super interesting. And if you don't know, Hunter S. Thompson wrote Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which I really want to read. It's definitely on my list. But he was also really good friends with Oscar Zeta Acosta, and he's really interesting because there's some conspiracy theories about his death, like he disappeared in Mexico and some people think it was like gang related or he was murdered somehow. But there's a fictional main character, but it really is sort of based on him as a person, the author. And I don't know if it's just the character, if it really is him, but he's not a very likable person. There's quite a bit of misogyny. Like, I'm not really on his side when I'm reading. However, I think there's still a ton of merit to this book. I learned so much about the Chicano rights movement, and it takes place during the Vietnam War era when Ruben Salazar, who was the famous Chicano journalist, was killed accidentally during a protest. And super interesting. I learned a lot about discrimination at that time. The main character is actually this sort of like Robin Hood lawyer for the people. Also, just this idea of Aztlan, I think that's how you say it, I didn't really know about before, but it's the ancestral homeland of the Aztec people. Basically, historians have speculated whether this was actually a real place or if this was a fictitious place, but a lot of the Chicano community identifies it as being in the southwestern United States, so like where California and where Los Angeles is. And a lot of people during that movement, and also just Chicano people, take pride in feeling like this was in fact their homeland and it was conquered and taken away from them, which I just thought was super interesting because I don't think that's something we talk about a lot in history classes. It was super fascinating to think about what Southern California could be in relation to Aztlan and the evolution of the Chicano community that is here, and learn so much about civil rights. Overall, I recommend it. As far as like prose style, it's not really my ideal but I still think it would be worth reading. So the next one I want to talk about is actually called Iffy, Hollers, Let Him Go by Chester Himes. And this one, again, I sort of have mixed feelings about. I think it has so much merit, and I think it's a really important story to read. And that's why I'm super glad, because I was assigned to read it in one of my classes, and in a completely different class at UCLA, my boyfriend was also assigned to read it. So it's very topical right now, especially with everything that's been going on this past year with racial injustice. But basically it's set in LA, obviously, in the early 40s. Bob Jones, the main character, is a black man trying to navigate his race during that time period in Los Angeles. It highlights different schools of thought within the black community that were prominent at this time, and the main character comes face to face with a group of black people who basically were on the Booker T. Washington wavelength. And I'm not an expert in this, but Booker T. Washington was kind of into the idea of accommodation and subservience as a way of gaining the respect of white people, and he also himself is grappling with whether that is the right move, or whether the W.E.B. Du Bois school of thought that was a little bit more pro-protest and pro-rebellion was the way to go in order to start paving the way towards equality. But basically it's super fascinating in that sense, because I feel like a lot of the racial tension and the discrimination that this character is facing, and a lot of it is way more explicit than what we think of today, is still super relevant today, and I think the story is pretty timeless. Worth a read. Again, it's kind of hard to read. It's pretty depressing, and the main character actually gets charged for a crime that he didn't commit against a white person, which is just horrifying. The prose style is a little bit more just minimalist, but not in a bad way, and I think the story really makes up for anything it might be lacking as far as prose. So I recommend this book as well. Definitely learned a lot. Okay, two more, just because I have them, are ones that I've actually already mentioned on this channel, so I'll link the video below. It's actually my first video that I ever made, and I talk about 5 of my favorite books by female authors. They also happen to take place in LA, so I thought I'd just throw them in. I won't go into them in depth because I kind of already talked about them in that video, but we have Play It As It Lays by Joan Didion, the queen, my idol herself. I just love Didion's writing style, and the way she depicts old Hollywood is really wonderful. So I highly recommend this. Also, we have Karente Yamashita's The Tropic of Orange, which takes place partially in LA and partially in Mexico. It has a really diverse cast, and it shifts between different narrative points of view. So I really like this book too. And then I'm going to talk about some books that I don't have physically, but that I have read recently. Okay, so this one I am so excited to talk about. It's called Tattooed Soldier by Hector Tobar. And I don't think people really know about this book, but I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. Hector Tobar is actually a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter, and he works at UC Irvine, in case you don't live in the area, which is super cool. I almost went to UCI before I decided on UCLA, but it's so tragic and so beautifully told. I thought the prose was great, and I thought the content was amazing. It follows a man who is a refugee from Guatemala, and he had his wife and children killed in the horrible political turmoil that was going on there at the time, and he came to America and he becomes homeless in Los Angeles. And part of the book at the beginning is him just getting kicked out of his apartment and living on the street, which just really got to me, because the homeless population in Los Angeles has, I feel like, skyrocketed since COVID. So many people have lost their homes, and it is just such a sad thing to see and heartbreaking. But even more than that, this book touches on a very difficult immigrant experience and generational trauma that came from all the economic and political turmoil in Central America during this time period, and it all sort of culminates in the Rodney King riots in 1992 and this great chaos and burning of the city that happened. It is fantastic. I highly recommend it. Also, different narrative points of view, kind of like the last book I mentioned, which is so much fun. And this was actually one of the books that that made me want to write the project that I'm writing in the way I am, because I thought it did such a great job of highlighting different characters and keeping the narrative super, super interesting. All right, so our next book is called Goldfame Citrus by Claire V. Watkins. Again, I haven't heard much about this book. I don't think it's very hyped up. I think it has like a 3.3 on Goodreads, and I'd give it probably like a 3.5-ish. I thought the prose was really beautiful. She has such a wonderful writing style, and there are some like block quotes that I highlighted throughout the book that I was just so impressed by. So you'll definitely find some jewels as far as prose goes in this book. But it's basically a sort of apocalypse type story that takes place in the near future in Los Angeles, which I don't normally read these types of novels, but I actually really enjoyed it. I didn't love the ending, but that's maybe just a personal thing. Maybe why I rated it lower than I should have. But yeah, it's sort of an environmental tale because the apocalypse did come from human-made folly. I'd say overall, it just sort of examines the stories that people tell about themselves and about each other, and it follows this girl who was the poster child for the environmental conservation movement before this apocalypse happened, and then nobody really did anything, and LA became an arid desert wasteland, basically. I think it's worth a read if you're interested in the subject matter, and there was some really good prose, but just, again, not super up my alley, but this was actually also assigned in one of the classes that I was in. Okay, so next up, a classic. We have The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler, and again, this is a book that I probably wouldn't have picked up on my own because I'm not super into crime fiction or mystery, but this one was actually really fun. It's sort of in the LA noir genre, and it's a hard-boiled detective novel. Raymond Chandler's fun. He's very masculine, and, you know, his main character, Philip Marlowe, is sort of morally ambiguous, but it's a fun little romp across Los Angeles, and you're sort of left wondering who the murderer is, and it's exciting. They actually made a movie adaptation of this book with Humphrey Bogart, which I thought was just classic, and that was in 1946. Reading books like this, you kind of get a lot of misogyny and somewhat flat, two-dimensional female characters, although there was some twists and turns, and he did turn some stereotypes on their head, I think. So it was interesting, and it is very introspective about the different layers of society and social class within the city, which I thought was really cool. A couple more. I'm gonna try not to make this a million hours long. We also have The Day of the Locust by Nathaniel West. Wow, I loved this book, and it's really short, so if you get a chance, read it because I think it's a classic. It follows this young artist named Todd from an East Coast prestigious art school, and he comes to Los Angeles. He's hired to do like set design and set painting. He is working on his own personal painting called The Burning of Los Angeles, and that is the background for the entire novel. He befriends all these different Hollywood stereotypes. My favorite and also my least favorite is Faye, who is this aspiring Hollywood actress with little talent who's super shallow, and a lot of people think that this is like the most misogynist depiction of a woman that there can be. She's super superficial, but it does a great job of depicting Hollywood culture, and I think it's still super prevalent today. But also, I think there is a reading that you could do of this book in which the author, Nathaniel West, is critiquing Todd, the main character, who is critiquing Faye. And in that reading, it's sort of a feminist reading because Todd thinks Faye is so shallow, but he is the one who's standing high and mighty. I think there's a lot of different perspectives that you can read this book from. There's so much performance in it. Such a fun part of depicting Hollywood culture. And it all sort of culminates in an actual riot and burning, which seems to be a through line throughout these books. And then the painting that Todd was working on kind of comes to fruition in a real way. It's great. It's awesome. I really enjoyed it. Last book I want to talk about, it's called Housemate of Dawn. It has a soft spot in my heart because I wrote a whole essay on it. In the essay, all that I focused on was different moments of laughter because I'm weirdly fascinated by the way laughter plays a part in literature because I think it can do so many different things. Very multifaceted. There's a lot of different dimensions to laughter, and it portrays so many different emotions, not just happiness or humor, but, you know, sadness. It's a weird coping mechanism. So if you are going to read this book, that's maybe something you can keep in mind. But basically, this is a 1968 novel by N. Scott Momaday. It's often credited as paving the way for Native American literature to make its way to to mainstream readers, and it was actually awarded the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. But again, this is kind of one of those books that I haven't heard a lot about, so I think it might be a little bit underrated. I think part of the reason is because the prose, while there's some of these really beautiful long meditations on landscape and scenery of the Southwest area, which is just great, I think it can get a little slow at times, and often readers who aren't part of the Native American culture or haven't been exposed to it before will sort of feel alienated by the characters because the characters aren't super deeply drawn. They're not quite vivid, but the landscape is. So I don't know, that might just be a cultural thing that didn't fully translate, but as a whole, I think it's a beautiful and important story. Basically, in the first part of the story, our main character, Abel, is on a reservation, and I believe N. Scott Momaday also grew up partially on a reservation. He ends up killing an albino who is known as the White Man, and then he is charged for that murder and found guilty and sent to a prison in Los Angeles. And so after that, the book sort of goes into his life recovering in Los Angeles and how difficult that adjustment is for him, going from reservation life to city life, which I thought was just really eye-opening and horribly sad, but really important. And again, it had beautifully striking imagery, I thought. I guess I was just a tiny bit disappointed when I was reading with the way some of the characters were sort of sketched. But honestly, still a great book. So I tried to race through that. It was probably really long. That was my list, part 1 of books in LA, because I freaking love LA literature. So again, comment down below if you are interested in seeing certain books, because I will be definitely reading more coming up and I want to make another one of these. And yeah, I'm super excited. I hope you guys liked it. Let me know in the comments. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.